One of the core principles for a life of holiness is that we should seek to avoid sin. But what exactly is sin? What does sin even mean? A lot of people think that sin is basically just breaking the rules, that God gave us rules for things we should do and things that we shouldn't do, and that when you break one of those rules, then you sin. The Ten Commandments are a really good example of this. God says we should keep the Sabbath day holy. God says that we should honor our parents, says that we shouldn't lie or steal or murder. And if you ever break one of those rules, that's a sin. The Greek word for sin is hamartia, which means to miss the mark. It's used when an archer shoots an arrow and then hits nothing. Just totally misses. We can understand sin as the times when you miss the mark. But there are other ways of thinking about sin. Some passages in the Bible talk about sin being more like an evil force or a disease. People fall into sin, or they are under the power of sin, as though sin has a life of its own and wants to consume things. The most striking version of this can be found in James 1. Everyone is tempted by their own cravings. They are lured away and enticed by them. Once those cravings conceive, they give birth to sin. And when sin grows up, it gives birth to death. Here sin is alive and deadly, almost like a cancer for the soul. So, how do we define sin? Well, sin just isn't that easy to pin down. The real answer is that sin is all of these things. It is breaking the rules. It is an evil force. Sin is individual and sin is communal. It's private and it's public. It's one single act and it's a disease. These are all useful ways for us to think about sin and understand what it is. But what sin isn't really the most important question, because no matter how we define sin, we all end up at the same place, separated from God. And that leads us to a more important question. What does sin do? Sin damages relationships. It breaks relationships between people, and more importantly, it breaks our relationship with God. In the creation story, we're told that we're made in the image of God. Sin keeps us from living that life, from being fully human, from being who we were created to be. Sin does this no matter how we define it. But God's grace covers all. You probably hear phrases like this all the time, and you might not understand it. Grace can be a fuzzy word. It's the kind of word you hear and it sounds nice, so it must mean that God is nice? That maybe grace is just God's niceness? But grace is so much bigger than that. Grace means that when we're separated from God, God reaches out to us and brings us back. It means that when sin breaks our relationship with God, or when sin breaks our relationships with one another, God offers to fix those relationships and make them whole again. Grace means that when sin keeps us from being who we were created to be, God makes us fully human again, makes us supremely good again. So, what is sin? Well, it's a lot of things. But what is grace? Grace is bigger.